Hello. Welcome to the Linux Lads podcast. I am Shane.
I'm Connor.
And I'm Mike.
And we are three random dudes sitting here in a room in Dublin. and we recently went to Oggcamp. So that's kind of the topic of today's episode. We're going to have a chat about that, all the cool stuff we saw there, all the cool people we met. But first, we're going to get into a little bit of news. So I believe the guys have something prepared. So I'll start with you, Mike.
So one of the biggest news that's recently hit the networks is that Dropbox is going to stop working on pretty much everything apart from extended 4 file system, and that's extended 4 unencrypted. I think, that just proves that people shouldn't be using Dropbox. What do you guys think?
Dropbox I found is actually quite useful. I've been using it in the past, so it's certainly. But this new decision that they made is certainly making me think that to move to something else. But what I've liked about Dropbox in the past is just the sync client has been in every repo of every Linux distribution for the past 10 years. If you're going back to Ubuntu or something like that, you just go straight away and type in Dropbox into the software manager, and Dropbox is there straight away, and you can just set it up, and the syncing has always been bomb-proof. But yeah, if they're making these kind of anti-freedom or anti-choices, I'm certainly thinking about switching to something else.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found Dropbox really handy myself in the past, mainly because with the Nautilus extension or the Nautilus client, it's super easy. It's just a folder on your desktop. It acts exactly like a folder in your home folder. That's what I always enjoyed about it. It's like I believe that's DAV syncing, DAV. I'm not sure if that's the exact technology it uses, but that's how it behaves. But yeah, I've always loved it. Yeah, not a big fan of this change either, but I don't know. I haven't used Dropbox in so long anyway. I tend to just split my files between Dropbox and Google Drive these days anyway.
On that point of talking about Google Drive or alternatives to Dropbox, since we're now shitting on Dropbox, we might as well say, but there are alternatives. Ooh. pCloud is something that I've been looking into. I've not been poking around with it. I don't know if it's a direct feature replacement for Dropbox for my needs, but it might be 80 or 90% there, and certainly would support more file systems than Dropbox would. And there's something also called Orclone, which I think is using OrSync in the background, and essentially if you have any kind of cloud storage, be it Google Drive or even Amazon or something very similar, Amazon's AWS, you can literally on their web page, if you go to just search for Orclone, and then they've literally a setup guide for anything, and it will literally say, okay, you want to speak to this cloud infrastructure, and they will just sync down. And the handy thing about Dropbox is it does have selective sync. So if you have, for example, an inordinate amount, let's say 500 gigs or 600 gigs stored up in Dropbox, if you're paying for one of their premium storage packages or something like that, I don't think Orclone has the selective sync, so I don't think you can pick and choose. I only want my photos folder, I don't want my music folder, which could be 50 gigs worth of music or something like that, syncing down every time I boot up Dropbox.
Mike, what about you?
Well, I don't actually use it. I use NextCloud pretty much for everything, and a little bit of pCloud recently. But about NextCloud, we might talk about it in a moment. But before that, how many of us actually use something else than plain Extended 4? I use Extended 4 encrypted, so I wouldn't be able to use a Dropbox from October. How about you guys?
I'm using Extended 4, just whatever is default with any distribution that installs on my computer, which invariably is in Extended 4. I don't specifically deselect the default and go with something else.
Do you encrypt it or?
No, I don't encrypt it.
No, I never get that detailed when it comes to file systems or anything. I'm just like, the default is ext4, so why not? I
think that default's real supreme, so pretty many people would be unaffected in this change because they will just get the Extended 4 from Ubuntu. That's not to say that Dropbox should just continue support as much as they can, but it's going to be okay for most people.
This might be a dopey question, but what about like Windows users using NTFS? Like
It will work.
They will
oh,
work.
okay.
They said they named the file systems that will work, and it's NTFS, HFS Plus for Mac, and the Apple FS for Mac, and Extended 4.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So those 4. So Windows gets 1, Mac gets 2, Linux gets 1. That's
okay.
officially supported.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I can't see that having a huge impact then. I mean, for the occasional person who wants to be different and run ZFS or ButterFS or B3FS or BTRFS or whatever you want to call it.
Or XFS is also a good one that I think Chris Fisher from Jupiter Broadcasting uses XFS quite heavily.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing is that many people encrypt the file system like I do, but maybe people like that won't necessarily like Dropbox, not just because of that, but for other reasons. So we might not. I'm not using it, so that might not affect us at all. On the topic of NextCloud, maybe because
yeah, we can go into the segue into NextCloud.
yeah, very very smooth. I like that. Basically, NextCloud, as in my opinion, the best syncing solution there is, because it's self-hosted and works very well with Linux and has got all like a million of options. They are going to be releasing NextCloud 14 in September, and it's gonna have amazing features. One of them is link verification by video. So you have something very private that you want to share with someone, but only with that person. You send them a link, and when they want to open it, it will open a video chat between you and them via NextCloud, so that you can see their face and verify that it's really them opening it. Cool or not?
That's cool, but why? Like it seems like a lot of work. Like it seems like it's cool and all, but like a very very tinfoil hat paranoid-y kind of feature. I mean, I'm never really worried that when I share a file with someone that I'm pretty sure it's the person I'm sending it to that's going to be opening it. But I don't know. Like, what is the use of that? Like, where would that come in useful?
They aim, I think, for enterprise. They were in the press release. They were saying, well, if you are communicating with your doctor, and maybe your wife knows all your passwords or something like that, then you might still not want her to open this communication. Or I think they are aiming very much for enterprise. There are other features that are enterprise related, like some kind of collaborative features. So this as well might be in a case where you don't trust your employees to make sane passwords, and you want to make sure that that what's private stays private. And they cater for people who are really privacy conscious, and they like these kind of features. Another news that they said is that they are going to be released, or NextCloud is going to be released on millions of routers made by NEC, the NEC corporation in Japan. So that just means they are getting huge, and I think that's a good thing, because that's something that works on Linux and works well, and it's great.
Yeah, especially having it installed by default on routers, like that's really interesting. Yeah,
certainly any kind of OEM adaptation of anything Linux related is certainly a good thing. It means that there's more eyes on the code, there's more feedback, and it can only lead to improvements. Probably another segue, if we're going to another bit of news that came up in the last while, quite recently actually, is the whole Steam Play and Proton. Proton is essentially a fork or improvement upon Wine. Wine is a backronym, as they call it. Wine is not an emulator. It's probably it's a intermediary between the Windows application and the baseline operating system, in this case Linux, and what Valve done, and I think they had support of the Wine developers themselves in this regard of creating a fork. What it essentially means is if you're on Linux and you have the beta version of Steam, there will be in your settings, there will be a new option called Steam Play, and if you enable that, essentially means that Windows games that are in your library you should be able to install. It is beta at the moment, so those games may or may not work. There's a certain amount of whitelisted games, including Age of Empires 2 HD Edition, which I installed and is working perfectly, which I'm very thrilled and chuffed about.
Oh yeah, I remember having like very late night LAN games of Age of Empires 2, and yeah, that's a fun game. But like, yeah, that's really cool, because like that's kind of the missing piece of the puzzle. Like, if it works properly, I mean, that's the only barrier I see to like widespread Steam OS adoption.
It's a game changer.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, that was the main thing that was missing. Like when that Steam OS and Steam Machines train was chugging along a few years ago, like that, everyone was kind of like, yeah, nice and all, but like, I can't play most of the games on Steam, so what's the point? And I think that's the main issue people had. So yeah, for the the unwashed masses who aren't as cool as us,
burn.
all the uncool like people who haven't heard of Linux and everything, and they're just like all the Twitchers and whatnot who love who want like sick FPS and max kill ratios and all this shit, all that competitive gaming stuff that I just don't understand. Like, for them, I mean, it's another little tick box. Like, ooh, okay, Linux. I wonder what this is all about now.
How cool and how great is Vine that you can build something like this on. I mean, gaming is the most performance heavy computing that you can get in, like household computing. So if you can use an emulator on Linux to do something like that, that's just amazing. Yeah,
it's just another thing that's like going to get people interested. It's good publicity, if nothing else.
I'm in a myriad of Linux related Telegram channels, and I think Alan Pope, also known as Popey, he shared an article. I will have to get the details, and I'll probably put it in the show notes. But there was a game that actually ran slightly better on using this Steam Proton thingamajiggy versus just straight up vanilla.
Does that have Vulkan support, or was it DirectX?
Do not know the specific game. I will get up the details, but it was like, when comparing, let's say if Windows was 100%, this was like 110% or something like that.
Wow.
It's kind of, it was in around that ballpark, and that's the average. I think the low FPS count, in other words the minimum FPS count, was slightly inferior compared to Windows, but we're talking about the average FPS count was slightly better than when just the game on Windows.
I have heard reports though that if a Linux game is done correctly, so if you have proper driver support, proper like the game is optimized for Linux or natively like built like for native Linux, and it's everything's targeted and focused on Linux, and it's done properly, you can actually get far better performance out of that game than its Windows counterpart. So like I think it's just a quirk of how Linux works. It's more efficient under the hood.
Aren't there problems with like drivers for the video cards there?
Exactly. But it's like the all the third party stuff, like that's the bottleneck. Like like if you just take like a stock Linux game or a stock Windows game and it's developed natively for each platform, but it's essentially the same game, then from what I've heard, it will run better on Linux 9 times out of 10.
I've also heard something very similar, and particularly since it's all going in a more open direction with Vulkan. I know Vulkan is again the specifics of the technology is escaping me at the moment, but I think it's kind of a interpretation or implementation of OpenGL or something. I don't think it's a specific driver stack itself or something, but again, somebody with better knowledge will probably be able to correct me. But and the NVIDIA with their proprietary drivers, certainly has very good support. But also AMD now with their open drivers, their drivers being open source. In fact, with the new cards, we're talking about the latest bleeding edge. So the latest bleeding edge cards and the latest bleeding edge kernels, which will be 4.18 or 4.19, maybe even kernels that are not yet released, might still be in release candidate stage or something like that, but that's how new it is. But once we get to that point, then all the AMD graphics drivers will be open source, and apparently it's very good things that are coming down the pipeline with regard to AMD cards.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of like open gaming stuff that sounds really promising, and just the whole stack. I mean, we had all that news of like RISC-V and Proton on Steam, and there seems to be a raft of announcements recently that are just making Linux more and more attractive to people, like not just people who are already into it.
Yay, Linux! I mean, would you guys then consider buying an AMD or buying an NVIDIA if you were to build a high-performance gaming PC?
Probably, if I was to build one now, I'd probably go with AMD. If I was to go with an AMD card, I mean, I do have a 750 Ti, which is pretty old at this stage, NVIDIA card, and the reason why I went with that is because without a doubt NVIDIA were the superior card at that time with their even with their proprietary drivers and everything. But certainly with this new revelation of AMD, I would certainly think about going with Team Red rather than Team Green.
Yeah, that was definitely my decision. Like when I built my last PC, I definitely factored that in to the components I bought, because I knew NVIDIA were better support, like their proprietary drivers were far better. So that's why I went with an NVIDIA card. Plus they were just releasing better cards at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's no longer a straight up NVIDIA win. Hands down, that has been in the past. At the moment, it's a much of a muchness, and with the news of what AMD is coming down the line, it might be like much of a muchness, 50% one way, 50% the other way at the moment, or even slightly in NVIDIA's favour. Might be 60-40 in NVIDIA's favour at the moment, but with what AMD is coming down the line, it's certainly something very promising.
Yeah. So, watch this space.
Mm-hmm.
So, Oggcamp, shall we move on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Lots to talk about there, I guess.
Certainly.
So, Connor, what was your favourite part of Oggcamp?
To be honest, like there were some very good talks, but it's all about the socializing, all about the networking. If you go to any of these free unconferences, as they like to be called, it's all about expanding your social network, expanding anything. Expanding the community anyway in relation to the Linux community. I now more frequently talk on things like Telegram and things like that to people that I've met during Oggcamp. So certainly that. But there was also some very good talks. For example, the one of the talks, Keith, I believe was his name.
Yeah, Keith Milner.
Yeah, was the GSM talk, which was very interesting, where essentially, I'll just give it a kind of a 2-sentence summary. Was essentially what he did was he took a bunch of Raspberry Pis and he set up his own 2G network with the permission of the communications regulator in the UK, but he got the license and everything, so he was able to do the demonstration. But essentially he said, do you know that massively complicated network that runs your mobile phone, be it Vodafone or O2 or whoever's your provider, that massively complicated infrastructure. He says, I can pretty much replicate that with a bunch of Raspberry Pis and an aerial. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think that was a huge hit at the pretty much everyone I talked to said that was like their favorite talk. He kind of overshadowed. For those who don't know, he did like 2 hours in total. So he did 1 hour of like just the primer for like all the technology, and the stack is unbelievably complicated on the first day, and then actually was meant to do the second talk on the same day but overran. So the second day then he had to do like a whole hour on how he built this himself basically, but really well researched, obviously really knows his stuff, just super interesting project, big hit. Mike?
Well, the biggest impression I got was how taken aback I was from all those people who expressed support for us when we said that we have a podcast. That kind of encouragement, I was expecting something like, yeah, you do. Well, good for you. Well, good luck with that. Yeah. No, I mean, we got so much advice that we could probably write a book on podcasting just from that. And
definitely a shout out to all the people who gave us advice.
Yeah, I mean, we should probably like thank them in the show notes or something.
We'll come up with a list of absolutely everybody who gave us advice, from as I mentioned, Alan Pope or Martin Wimpress from the Ubuntu podcast, or Mark also gave us advice as well, from Joe Ressington. I'm sure there's people that I'm not. Dan as well gave us advice as well. But as I said, all of this will be more structured and will be in the show notes. So we'll give proper acknowledgement to everyone who gave us advice.
It's kind of like accepting an Oscar or something. There's so
I'd like to thank yes.
I'd like to thank Jesus.
Also known as Joe Ressington.
I'm sure he'll love that.
Which one? Well, so that was that just the whole community thing that we got out of the train station in Sheffield, and suddenly we were in space surrounded by people who not only know what Linux was but also were very interested in it, and the whole culture that you can go to a pub and talk about things that really interest you, and the thing that the people we consider kind of celebrities in our niche are actually exact opposite of that, like really approachable, really nice,
without a doubt.
And that it was you can probably tell from my enthusiasm that this was my first big conference.
Same with me.
It was astonishing how great an experience it was. I'm definitely going next year. I'm gonna risk getting into Brexit Britain for that.
On that point that Mike was making, that these are what we considered pseudo celebrities, and we're going, oh, you're talking to me. But they're salt of the earth, genuinely nice guys. They're so approachable. They're even after all the advice that they gave us, and after like hour plus long discussion over a few beers, they left the conversation and they said, any more questions that you have with us, like, feel free to contact us. And they're like genuinely salt of the earth people. Yeah,
it's just like I remember a couple of years back when I went to my first Oggcamp in Liverpool, like a lot of people were amazed that I'd flown over from Dublin and they were like, you flew on a plane to come here? And I was like, well, yeah, but like I think what people don't realize is that like in the UK there is a big community of this, and there's a similar community in Ireland, I'm sure, but because, I don't know, smaller country, less people, it's not as obvious, it's not as out there, and there's like sparse pockets of people interested in all this stuff all over the country who probably don't get in touch with each other or don't know that each other exist. So it's pretty awesome for someone like from Ireland, where this stuff isn't as out there, to like go to one of these things and talk about this stuff, just like, and people know what the hell you're talking about and don't look at you like you've three heads, and and what's this Linux thing I've been hearing about? Is that some kind of software? It's like, it's just, I tried to explain what Linux was to someone in work the other day, and I was coming from like level 0, and they were like something to do with computers. And I was like, oh god, I have a lot of work to do. But so on for me, talks wise, I quite enjoyed the retro computing stuff. Like we had, forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Jerome. The Dutch guy?
The mainframe.
Yeah, the mainframes. I thought that, like, I didn't know what I was looking at really, but it was very interesting because I'm really interested in like classic computing and how people did this stuff like 30, 40 years ago. Like, I find it fascinating. And all the problems they were smarter than us basically, like, because they had to come up with way more ingenious solutions. Like, now we just type 3 lines of code and it does what took them 6 months.
On that talk was quite interesting. Was like very well done presentation and everything, and he brought us through the history of it and broke us down and into even doing a live demonstration on his laptop, doing the commands and everything. And then one stage towards the end of it, he says, "Oh yeah, and you can," and he has a photograph. You can run this all on the Raspberry Pi Zero.
Yeah, it's like a pocket calculator processing power is what sent men to the moon. So like, we're spoiled nowadays. In general though, in the whole weekend, just to give you guys, if you're interested in going to Oggcamp, definitely recommend making the trip, especially if you're in Ireland. Definitely, hop on a shitty Ryanair flight and get over there and.
Avoid the scratch cards.
And avoid Manchester Airport.
Yeah, by all means possible. Fly to Edinburgh and take a train or something.
There's what is it? Midlands Airport or East Midlands Airport, which is actually a garden shed with a runway. But even that is superior to Manchester Airport. Yeah,
let's not spoil the talk about Oggcamp by the shitty experience of Ryanair and Manchester Airport.
You will genuinely, if you go to Oggcamp, you'll genuinely meet the nicest people. I was like so enthused in relation to exponential fold more enthusiastic about the whole Linux community and the whole Linux ecosystem after going to Oggcamp. It was just really inspiring meeting all of those really nice people.
What did you guys make of the podcast talk that was recorded and on scene, with all of them on the stage in the main area?
Yeah, I liked that because they brought up a question that I've wondered about for quite some time. Like, how do we take this out of like the community and show it to other people who mightn't necessarily already be interested in it? So I've often thought about that myself and thought really hard about it. Like, how do you make people into it? Like, who just like, because obviously like we'd hook up like some sort of like, we'd be messing about with some code on some server or something that like makes a little light flash on a circuit board, or those kind of little mini projects that make us like jump with joy. Like, other people don't get excited by that stuff because they're just different people. So how do you make those kind of people interested in this stuff and show them why it's interesting and why it's fascinating and what it can do for them, basically?
From my experience, the stuff just has to be better. Like, so if you work around developers, they use Linux not because it's free, open source or whatever, mostly, unless they are really interested. If they are not interested in this kind of thing, they will use it because it's better than Windows and better than Mac, or maybe better than Windows and cheaper than a Mac, or for whatever reasons, but it have to be something that gets them interested. I don't think, if you have a person who's not interested in computers, or is not or maybe he is, but maybe not but maybe just in gaming, then you will have to give them something extra to look for.
Or even, I suppose, developers will be the default target market. That's probably the reason why Dell, with their Project Sputnik, initially were going after developers, whereas the Dell XPS 13 Developer Edition came with Ubuntu by default, and now they're gradually bringing into their lower down Inspire Online or whatever their slightly lower down, less premium line is. I think it's a slow process, but I think they're doing it in the correct way, where they're gradually introducing it to a larger and larger audience. I think if you turned up at a PC World or something like that, and it's like a Dell with Ubuntu on it, I'm sure you'll get plenty of people just complaining, saying this is not Windows, this is not what I'm used to, even though it would do whatever you want. I mean, the vast majority of people, when they go and they buy a cheap laptop, cheap 400 or 500 euro laptop, all they're doing is browsing the internet, watching YouTube, browsing Facebook, watching Netflix or whatever, and doing some word processing or spreadsheets or something like that, all of which will Ubuntu or any other Linux distribution will do perfectly adequately. But I think you get a lot of complaints is just change in relation to the average Joe just going into a shop.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I have a really great story. Like my mother actually had a really crappy Toshiba laptop, touchscreen thing with like Windows 8 or something on it, or something equally disturbing. And like she like had that classic thing of where she couldn't find how to turn off the computer. Do you remember that? Like the actual off fucking switch was like hidden behind menu, up on menu.
Yeah.
And so she couldn't use the thing, and the fan would go like 90 miles an hour, and like the battery life was terrible, and it was just not a great machine. But the software didn't make it any better. But like I said, right, give it to me, and I put Linux Mint on it, gave it a spin up, showed it to her, and she didn't ask me a single question. She just started using the thing, and like, and I asked her afterwards, I was like, how are you getting on? That's how you getting on your first Linux experience on your laptop. She was like, it actually runs so much quicker. She's like, it's amazing. And she said, I said, do you find it difficult to use? Like, what's like, how does it compare to Windows? She's like, no, it's actually easier. And I was like, there you go.
Thank me later.
Yeah, it's like, but that's a classic case. Like, it's not. Like, I don't know, people who don't use Linux seem to think it's something really complicated and convoluted. It really isn't. Like, it's just...
Yeah, well, you made it better for her, so that's why she appreciated using Linux. And that's when they asked the question at the podcast, do you use Linux because it's better, or do you use it because it's open? I wanted to raise my hand for both, because it's better because it's open, and that kind of development model is ensuring a better operating system. And as long as we can get it out there and have people have a look at it, then they might realize that it is better suited for their needs than something that's made under the closed source principle, and therefore like brings around a lot of things that prevents people from doing what they need to do.
I think there is a stereotype out there that Linux is only for people who just live on the command line and are doing sysadmin stuff and everything. Sure, it's very well suited for that topic, or that use case, because you can admin servers, you can do everything very efficiently from a Linux machine. But that's not that wasn't my approach. That's not what got me into Linux at all. Was invariably, even though I do a small bit of command line commands myself, invariably I would use the GUI method for installing updates or finding new software or something like that. So I invariably am approaching it from the same angle that a new user would, or a user that's coming directly from Windows would, where they say, oh, I'm going to bring up the software store or whatever, as going to find, oh, can I install Firefox, or can I install VLC, or whatever they're looking for. So it certainly would like to dispel the myth of Linux is just for people who just live in the command line. It suits those people, sure, but it also suits, as Shane was saying, there are people who just want something saying, oh, Windows is really frustrating, it's really slow, and all I want is a computer that freaking runs Netflix or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just going to fire up a web browser, or if you just want to, type up a document or something, I mean, no problem. Like, you can do that. Like, it's not, those aren't complicated tasks. And I actually find whenever I boot into Windows, I just get frustrated because there's so many prompts and pop-ups and notifications and everything, and it's too busy. It's too much getting in my way. Like, I don't want that. I just want a clean desktop. There you go. Start using it.
On that point of the amount of pop-ups that Windows give you, is the whole idea, and this is one of the fundamental things that kept me coming back to Linux, was the way it handles updates. Updates are centrally managed. So, for example, everything will be on your operating system updates, be it Firefox or something like that. And also, it doesn't care when you run the updates. It'll say updates are available. You can click install the updates, and if the updates do not require a restart, then the updates are already applied. If an update does require a restart, for example, an update to the kernel or something like that, we'll just say a little pop-up will say this update will apply next time you reboot your computer. You may not reboot your computer for 2 or 3 months after that. After that point, your computer will run perfectly fine. It will just be using the previous version of the kernel before the update, and then as soon as you reboot your computer, then the new update will apply. In other words, it doesn't nag you. It doesn't interrupt any session that you're doing. If you're watching a movie, if you're playing a video game, it will not interrupt that. Even if there are updates going on in the background, it won't forcefully reboot your computer, unlike what Windows will invariably do.
Just the difference basically being that with Linux you're in control.
Yes.
With Windows you're not.
Also, on the point of the centralized updates of everything from Firefox and everything being in your centralized updates, one thing I did notice when I was on Windows was, for example, I'm just going to pick Firefox as an example. It's probably a poor example. Just roll with it for the moment. Is if it's something that you use infrequently, so let's say you use a program once every 6 months, and then you say, oh, I have a use for this program. Let's say not Firefox, let's say a photo editing program. You only use it once every couple of months. Then as soon as you open up the that app and say, oh yeah, I want to use this right now, the first thing it comes up with is this app needs updates. Whereas the centralized updates, as soon as you click the updates, everything is updated, even your infrequently used applications.
And I really like the way this is becoming future-proof, because even Snaps now, and I think Flashback, auto-updates as well, but it updates in the background and it updates everything rather than, as you said, just updates when you start the application.
Which can be frustrating as all hell. Trust me.
Yeah, I've experienced that a few times. Like when I go into Windows and I want to use like video editing software that I haven't used in ages, like I get that. It's like a new version is available. It's like, shut up. Why didn't you do this when I wasn't using it?
Just auto updates in the background.
So basically, just for the benefit of anyone listening who has never ever been to Oggcamp and has no idea what to expect, I just thought we'd maybe go through a little rundown of the weekend and what we got up to. So all three of us, plus another guy, we basically we flew over to Manchester Airport. The four of us.
Tad Cantwell for the shout out.
Oh yeah. We'll mention him. He's helped us out a lot as well, actually.
Yeah.
But all four of us went to Manchester Airport on a Ryanair flight, and got the train over to Sheffield. Got a hotel over there. So how it works is like there's a Friday night social. Everyone kind of hangs out, has a few beers. Everyone has some food, etc., etc. Then it's bright and early, 9 a.m., 10 a.m. on Monday for talks, and there's a lunch period, and you can buy swag and stuff in the main lobby area. And some people go and they don't go to a single talk, and which is totally fine. Like, I mean, like there's times I think I went to only a handful of talks myself over the weekend. Like I think I maybe went to 3 or 4 max. But that's kind of not really the point. I mean, they're there if you want to go, but it's over 2 days and you've a lot to choose from, so you're going to miss out on something. So, some of the keynotes were quite good. Some of the community talks were good. I think I got a nice little cross section of talks that I went to and we went to.
Just a slight interjection. There is more than one stage, so some of the talks are running concurrently. So you never possibly get to every single talk anyway. So if you go to any of these conferences, definitely don't stress about attending every single talk. Don't think it's anyway required or mandatory or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, it is what you make it. It's an unconference, so it's, if you want to go there and just talk to other people about stuff you don't usually get to talk about, that's fine. That's kind of the reason I went in the first place. But yeah, then you've also got a few hours of talks and stuff to attend, and then you can get cool little bits of swag and stickers and for your laptop, and there's a bit of networking there as well if you run a podcast. So it is what you make it. It's a great weekend. It's just, I'd recommend taking the Friday and the Monday off work so you can get the most out of it.
Definitely.
So it's thoroughly recommended if you're at all interested in the next. Even if you're not, go. Just you might learn something.
Yeah, as I said, everyone you meet is thoroughly probably the nicest people you ever meet. They're unassuming, very approachable. There's no egos in it whatsoever, which is the appeal of what they call this community-run conference, or this unconferences. And sometimes the terms vary depending on how you interpret it, but that whole idea of it's completely informal, but that informality bleeds into everything. It means that everyone's approachable. Everyone is saying, "Oh yeah." If you're in the pub, let's say on the Friday night or the Saturday night after the talks, and you go up to somebody and say, "Oh, I really liked your talk," and then you could invariably have a half an hour discussion with the person that you just witnessed their talk a couple of hours ago. During the day, their presentation, and you could have a really fruitful and fulfilling conversation with somebody, because you could literally just saw them in the pub afterwards and say, "Oh, I really liked your talk, let me buy you a beer," or something like that, and then everyone's really approachable.
Actually, that's something I was thinking of myself. There's no separation between the talkers and the listeners, if you like, it's if you want to go to something like, I don't know, the Tech Summit in Dublin, and you pay through the nose for a ticket, and it's all very professional and industry based. This is kind of the antithesis to that. It's just community fun. It can be related to professional stuff if you want it to be, but generally it's just for people who love doing this stuff and who love learning about it.
It is not everything or only strictly about Linux. Obviously, it's also open or sharing culture, as they call it. So there were some talks on community, on how to set up an organization that does community matters, and also many of the people who put it together are participating in let's say Creative Commons music and other sharing culture ecosystem. So there's another side to it than just Linux.
Actually, just hearing you talk about that, Mike, was the whole sharing culture and the whole setting up your own thing, was one of the talks that I found was actually really interesting. Was this group of people set up a co-op with a membership, and people pay their dues, and then what they do is saying, okay, rather than paying your tenner a month for Google or Dropbox or something like that, we host our own cloud, and you have access to this cloud. And the whole thing of it's small, and you know the contact of the person the people who are running it, and say if you literally just, it's an email away, and they're usually pretty responsive. If you can say, I'm using your service and I find your service really slow, can you help it out with me, or help me out with it? I'm sure they would all be really approachable, because it's literally only run by about 5 or 6 people versus Google or Dropbox, where you're just another ticket number or something like that. But that whole go to get up attitude of, let's say if you're saying, I'm sick of Dropbox, I'm sick of Google Drive, I'm sick of Amazon's cloud, or I'm sick of Apple iCloud, or whatever, screw it, I'm going to set it up myself. And this whole thing of just developing a cooperative in the UK, setting up your own company, and saying, listen, this may only, we're only 5 or 6 people, and this may only serve 50 to 100 people, but this is what our business model is, and it may be very small scale, but I like the whole get up and do it attitude of that.
I really like that too. That was really interesting, and it was something so obvious that it just never occurred to me. Just to give them a shout out, they were called the Dark Peak Data Collective.
That's correct.
Yeah. So the Dark, I don't know their website. We'll put it in the show notes, I'm sure. But yeah, really fascinating project, and they're not the only one. I actually heard of more than one while I was there. Mike?
Yeah, if anybody's interested to know what it was all about, we will obviously have the link to the Oggcamp website in the show notes, and I think the notes for the actual talks and the schedule are still up, so people will be able to look up. Many of the presenters put their slides online as well, so people will be able to look up what was happening there, even if they weren't there.
Yeah. How are we doing on time?
We're at about 44 minutes, 45 minutes.
Yeah, so do we have any closing remarks, or do you have anything else we want to talk about? Any cool stories from Oggcamp?
Nothing that springs to mind, just Oggcamp, do it.
Yeah. Mike?
Oh, same. I 100% agree. Yeah, Oggcamp, do it.
Yeah, I'll definitely be trying to attend as best as I can, work permitted or finances permitted next year. But certainly it wouldn't be lack of enthusiasm is the reason why I wouldn't be able to attend next year.
Yeah, I think there's one thing we didn't mention. There is you don't have to pay for
yes.
it.
Yeah. So it's free.
So it's just basically getting there and accommodation.
Yeah, flights and accommodation.
And I think there are people who actually take it literally and they camp somewhere on a site nearby, or it was a thing in the past where they basically put up a tent on a camping site, so it can be done cheap.
Yeah, so it's not an expensive weekend. And if you're from Dublin as well, going over to the UK is always way cheaper.
Yeah, the drinks, the prices.
Oh yeah, we ended up in a Witherspoons on the Friday, and it was like £2 or £2.50 drinks in sterling, which worked out at about, I think, between £2.30 and £3 a pint.
Yeah,
in euro.
Like not a snowball's chance in hell you would get a pizza and a drink for €8 here.
Yeah,
unless it was really terrible, but it was really good pizza.
No, it was good stuff, and I think I made the joke. I forget who it was at the time, but one of the podcast presenters, and I said, "Oh, this place is so cheap that I can get drunk on a tenner," and he replied back saying, "I can get drunk on a tenner anyway." I think he was saying he was a bit of a lightweight, but
yeah. So definitely go to Oggcamp is the message we're trying to get across, I guess. So I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for listening.
I've been Connor.
I've been Mike.
And I have been your host, Shane. So, see you guys.
Bye.